time for the star to shine. Anything to say before I start? Any encouragement? It's my third week of doing these. Actually, you need to count me down.
Okay.
Count me down.
Why?
So I'm ready to go.
3, 2, 1, action!
Welcome to our third week of online learning. Today we are going to be continuing our unit on the Americas and the effect of Europeans on America. Today our topic is going to be pretty big picture in the Columbian Exchange. So our topic, Columbian Exchange. We're going to do multiple impacts of the Columbian Exchange. So the second half of the lecture is going to be some more impacts. Start date 1500. Now, there's no Columbian Exchange goes from this time to this time. We see where the Columbian Exchange starts in 1500. So, first, our definition of the Columbian Exchange. I'm going to say this slowly, so make sure you get down this definition. Our definition is the on-purpose and accidental transfer of goods, ideas, people, diseases, culture, basically everything from the Americas, also known as the Western Hemisphere, to the rest of the world and vice versa. So basically we have this transfer of all these different things, both from Afro-Eurasia to the Americas and from the Americas to the rest of the world. Cool. Our origins. So we have to remember that a long time ago, when humanity was first roaming the earth and setting up in different spots, people walked all the way to the Americas, and then basically that land bridge disappeared. And so everyone who's lived in the Americas has been completely separated from the rest of the world. That's why we have Afro-Eurasia, all the continents, Africa, Europe, Asia, that have stuck together and been in contact. Then the Americas, which has basically just been separated. So the origins of this is when the Europeans, who were not the first group from Afro-Eurasia to find the Americas, but they're the first ones to find the Americas and maintain contact and then continue coming back and back to the Americas. So our origins is the Europeans in the late 1400s who traveled to the Americas, started colonizing it, starting with the Spanish, who conquered much of the Caribbean, conquered the Aztecs and the Inca, and started colonizing it. And then we had more and more other European groups, such as the English, the French, all who came to the Americas, colonized, and set up. People are supposed to be sitting inside. Mika!
Quiet, please.
Shh, quiet on the set.
Please.
We have our Europeans who are now colonizing and taking goods and traveling back and forth from the Americas back to Europe. Same from Europeans go to Africa, then travel back and forth. So we have this constant back and forth. Now we want to look at what's the impact. And we have to look at the impact in two ways. So for every one of our main thematic impacts, we're going to look at both how did that impact the Americas and how did that impact the rest of the world. So we're going to start with the environment. So first, we're going to look at first the Americas. The environmental impact on the Americas from the Columbian Exchange was huge. First with animals. As I mentioned in a previous lecture, the Americas did not have any major draft animals. The only major one that they had were llamas, and that was the Inca. With the arrival of the Europeans, our first big environmental effect was all of the new animals that were brought to the Americas. Pigs, cows, chickens, things like that were brought over and then spread throughout the Americas. For example, horses were brought when the invasion of the Aztec into Central America. They started spreading all up into the North America. There were Native Americans in Southwest United States that took on horses, changed their whole lifestyle because of them. So the big idea, though, is that when you bring animals into a new environment, they often have few to no predators. That meant pigs, cattle, horses grew in population size very quickly because there was no one really stopping them. That led to a lot of environmental effect, as these animals, of course, will affect the environment. They will eat and destroy forests. They will change the area around them based on what they eat and affect, as well as humans changing the environment to breed animals. Often humans have to cut down a lot of trees to create grazing space. Next is agriculture. Yes, the Native Americans lived in the Americas, grew food, but they often grew food in conjunction with the environment. It was a pretty even split, or the environment wasn't heavily affected. The Europeans are going to continue this agriculture, but do it at a much larger pace. One of the biggest impact style of agriculture is plantation style agriculture. That is when you have a huge farm whose whole purpose is to grow one or two type of food, usually what we call cash crops, such as sugar or tobacco. And the problem with plantation agriculture is, one, you're growing more things than the population actually needs, so you're overgrowing. That usually means you have to cut down a lot of forests. You have to change the local environment to grow this stuff. Not only that, plantation agriculture hurts the environment by destroying the soil. You're growing a lot of the same food that's going to suck the nutrients out of the soil, and at the time they didn't really know that. So that's going to affect the environment as well. Last but not least, mining. Europeans, remember, their big goal is to gain wealth. One of the biggest way they gain wealth is mining of gold at first, but then later they found huge silver deposits throughout the Americas. And so this mining of silver is going to heavily affect the environment. To mine silver, you have to dig deep into the ground. You have to kind of destroy the area around it to be able to get to the silver veins, and that's going to hurt the environment, this mining of silver. Now, the rest of the world, the effect we see. So, the Americas provide the rest of the world certain kinds of food that become very, very popular. Specifically, two types of food. Corn, also known as maize. Also, the potato. Yes, the potato was first in the Americas. The rest of the world didn't have the potato. And then after the connection of the world, of the Western and Eastern hemispheres, we have the spread of the potato. The potato... I know, Mika, you really like potatoes. Yeah. The potato is going to spread around the world. It's going to become very popular. We're going to talk about the effects of the potato later on in lecture. But basically, as these foods, the corn and potato especially, but others, spread throughout the world, they would actually become more popular than the local foods that were already there. This is going to, around the world, decrease biodiversity. People are going to grow less and less of the variety of foods they have and grow more of the same foods that are popular, that are easier to grow, and they can generally make more money off of. So we're going to have worldwide decrease of biodiversity from the Columbian Exchange. Cool. Now we're going to move on to cultural impacts. What I want to emphasize as this lecture continues is that when I'm noticing your guys' notes, you'll write environment, you might write animals, but you're not getting the information. So make sure as you're getting the big ideas, you're also getting the filler information that I'm giving you. Cool. Cultural impacts. We have two big cultural impacts of the Columbian Exchange. First is faith. The Europeans are going to bring their faith, Christianity, but specifically Catholicism early on, to the Americas. And it's a big deal to the Europeans that they convert as many people as possible. Now, the natives are not necessarily gung-ho about Catholicism. They're not just going to completely convert. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit their culture. So what we see that happens in the Americas is what we call syncretism. Syncretism basically is when you take two faiths and combine them and create a whole new faith, or dramatically change one of the faiths based on this combination. So what is created in the Americas is both new faiths, but also the changing of specific faiths. One of the most famous versions of this is Latin American Catholicism. So basically, we're gonna dive more into this later, but the big idea is that to convert the Native Americans, the Spanish are going to fundamentally change and adapt certain parts of Catholicism to fit Native Americans. So for example, the Native Americans have many, many, many gods. Catholicism has saints. So what they'll do is that they will take the gods of the Native Americans and turn them into saints. One of the most famous examples is Saint Guadalupe, who is a saint completely created to help convert Native Americans. Second, we also have the use of Native Americans would build shrines. Those shrines would just be converted into Catholic shrines. There's also certain holidays that the Catholics completely took on from the Native Americans to convert them. One example is the Day of the Dead. That is not something that is celebrated by Catholics worldwide. That is just celebrated in Latin America. Not only that, though, we have the creation of new faiths. Some examples is as Africans were brought over in the slave trade, which we will dive more into later. The African faith, the African local tribal faiths, is combined with Catholicism to create voodoo. Once again, that use of saints and the use of taking on certain rituals and making them Catholic as a way to convert many of the Africans. And overall, the big idea is that people are not just going to convert to a faith wholesale. They're going to take parts of what they know, combine it into Catholicism to create a mixed version that fits them better. Cultural impacts also include people. Africans, Native Americans, and Europeans are all going to start living in South and Central America together. This is actually going to create one of the most diverse populations in the world. It's very rare. You have people from 3 different continents living together in a significant population. So what's a big cultural impact that happens in the Americas is as Europeans, natives, and Africans combine their cultures together and live together, we're going to have cultural mixing and the creation of whole new, very unique cultural identity of Latin American. Cool. That is the end of our first half of our lecture. Our second half is going to be about more impacts of the Columbian Exchange. Make sure your notes are updated and ready to go for the second half. I can't wear those glasses for the second half. I had to keep pushing them up. It's too much. I'm a professional. All right. Second half of the lecture. Start now! All right, our next impact of the Columbian Exchange is economic impact. So remember, that means we're focusing on wealth, how it's created, who gets it, things like that. So our economic effects of wealth. First, this is going to be both America's and world-based, the effects of silver. So, this is silver, as we're going to learn about, again, when we do a deep dive on silver. It is going to become the world connector. That silver is going to be one of basically the first world currency that makes it available that if you have silver, you can trade with almost anyone around the world. So, Europeans are going to find a lot of silver in Central and South America. Now, what is this silver trade going to allow them to do? One, this silver trade is going to allow them to both grow in wealth, so European countries are going to gain a lot of wealth from this trade in silver, specifically Spain first, but as Spain spends that silver and spreads it throughout Europe, other European countries will also gain wealth from silver. But second, and more importantly, this silver allows Europeans to trade with China. China does not want European goods. We'll get into this more when we get into the European interaction of Asia, but baseline. China does not want European goods. The way that Europeans can trade with China is through silver. So this silver allows Europeans to both gain wealth through the use of silver and having it, but also gain wealth through the trade of China. As they have this item, silver, that China wants, they can trade with China to get Chinese goods. So that is both an economic benefit, mostly for Europe as European countries grow more and more and more wealthy. It's also a net negative in a way for Central and South America as they don't see much of the silver wealth. All the silver is taken out of the Americas, not really used for the people in the Americas. Next is the plantation system. So as we said in the previous part of the lecture, plantations become a big deal in Central and South America. Plantations are one of the greatest economic creators for European countries. One of the big reasons their colonies can exist is how much money they make off plantation agriculture. The 3 big cash crops that make the system run are cotton, tobacco, and sugar. Those 3 items make a lot of money, and they're called cash crops because you can't really survive on any of them. They're not a major food product, but they're used and are used in other things and make a lot of money. Everyone wants them. With that, this plantation system is going to create a lot of wealth for the colonies, but it's also going to create a lot of wealth for European countries as they take these raw resources out of the Americas and make items out of them in Europe. The big deal is that they are taken to Europe to make finished goods, and these finished goods are sold by European countries to make money. This actually leads us to mercantilism, one of our first economic systems. The understanding of mercantilism is basically why the colonies exist in the first place. The idea of mercantilism, there's a lot to it, so we're going to kind of go step by step. The biggest point of mercantilism is that countries have to win trade. There's basically what we call zero sum, that if you are selling less than you are buying, then you're losing trade. So it's the goal of every country to do a couple things. 1, make sure that their colonies only trade with them. So if I'm Spain, I don't want any of my colonies to trade with any other country but me. That is because as Spain, I get the raw resources out of my colonies that I make into finished goods and sell elsewhere. That leads to our second point. You always want to sell more than you buy. You're France, England, Spain, and these European countries. Your goal is to take these raw resources you get from your colonies, make goods out of them, and sell them to other countries. And your goal is that your country has been selling more than other countries. This is often enforced through something called a tariff. A tariff is a tax on foreign goods. So let's say I'm France. I want to make money off the selling of finished clothes. I've taken cotton, I've now made clothes out of them. I will pass a tariff that makes it so clothes from England cost more than my clothes. This will make it so that people in France will buy clothes made in France. It's a way to try to decrease trade from elsewhere and make people in your country buy your country's goods. Last but not least, this also creates a lot of violence when it comes to the control of trade. European countries will be constantly fighting each other to see who can control trade routes. This is going to cause a lot of conflict between European countries. Who can have the most trade routes? The last idea of mercantilism is that as a country, you're trying to collect and keep as much silver as possible. The more silver you have in the bank or in your vault, the better you're set off. Cool. This then leads to our last impact, the societal impact of the Columbian Exchange. First is demographics. As we talked about earlier a little bit, the demographics of the Americas is going to change. Instead of it just being a Native American population, you're now going to have a decreased Native population that is then mixed with a European population that moves over and an African population that moves over. And so this is going to be a unique demographic setup as you have all of these people living together. Next is population. Population is going to increase worldwide, specifically because of the potato. As the potato spreads, farmers find out a couple of things. One, the potato is very easy to grow. You can grow it in almost any climate, and it grows quickly. So you can now grow you can have multiple crops in a year of potatoes. And potatoes, if eaten, provide a lot of basic nutrients someone can survive off of. And so what happens is as potato spreads around the world, farmers start using it more and more. More food equals more people. So you actually have a worldwide population increase. Even in the Americas, where population drops heavily because of disease, as population goes down in the Americas from disease, you then have a population rebound, both from people moving to the Americas, Africans and Europeans, but also the increase in population from the use of potato. Cool. Last but not least, we have hierarchy. A big part of societal, and our big theme of society, is who has power in society. First, because of the Columbian Exchange, we're going to focus a lot of the hierarchy in the Americas. In the Americas, our hierarchy becomes heavily race-based. This isn't to say that hierarchies throughout the world haven't have some sort of racial component to it. You can argue many have. But what's unique about in the Americas is that you have three distinct races of people: European, African, and Native. And this creates a very unique social hierarchy. Our example is the Las Castas system, which literally means the caste system in Central and South America. That was completely based on race. Europeans, called Creoles, were at the top of the hierarchy. Creoles were pure European descent, born in the Americas. This was followed by mixed people in the middle, such as mestizos, natives and Europeans, mulattoes, Africans and Europeans, who were in the middle and had the second most amount of power. And at the bottom, you had pure, basically. Or the idea is that pure natives, pure Africans, or the mixture of native and Africans. And the big deal here is that what race you were, what mixture of races you were, determined usually your job, your education, your wealth, your land. Creoles owned all of the land. Mulattoes and mestizos were generally like business owners or people who worked directly with the Creoles. And then people who were natives or Africans were usually laborers who had to work on plantations or do really low level, very low wage work and had less rights. And so this hierarchy is something that is still echoed in history today. If you go to South America, in many countries, the poorest people in those countries are usually African or direct native descent, while those in power are usually lighter skinned because they're Creole descent, people who are so heavily connected to their European ancestry. And so this hierarchy is going to become a huge theme and importance in South and Central America. Cool, that is the end of our second lecture about the Columbian Exchange. This was a pretty broad lecture about the effects, and we're going to be doing a lot of deep dives of certain areas, especially when it comes to specifically in the Americas. Next lecture is going to be about the rule of Spain and what it looks like. Awesome. Good job. Later. Bye.